what's up, guys? It's the Insane Game Freak. How are you guys doing? Hope you're doing well. Hope everything's good. I know it's officially the 17th, which means Pokemon Let's Go has been out for around maybe about 24 hours, or at least more than 12 at this point. And everyone's enjoying themselves. Hope you guys are enjoying yourselves. I'm not. Sunset Overdrive just came on PC, so I have things to do. Also, other games to play. And like I said before, I do not own the game. I'm not getting the game. I'm fine. That doesn't mean I haven't looked up footage and walkie animations, because Game Explain makes things hard, but I'm alright. Don't have the game, I'm good. Anyways, this ain't what the fuck this video is about. This video is actually about Sony. So, which is kind of funny, because I'm actually recording this on a Sony camera, but that's besides the point. So Sony recently announced, well, actually I wouldn't even say that, it was essentially leaked too early in advance, I'm guessing, that Sony would not have a normal E3 press conference in 2019. Actually, it was announced they won't have any presence at E3 2019. Like, they're just not there at all. It's not like Nintendo where you get a direct, you don't get a stage show, but they're still there in the booth and the conference and shit. No, Sony's like, we're not coming at all. Like, the way people framed Nintendo when they said they were going with directs instead of live press conferences, the way they thought of Nintendo's E3s from now on being that they're just not going to be there is literally what Sony is suggesting to do. And from what I understand, the main reasoning behind it seems to be a lack of content to show, which makes sense. They didn't even do their PlayStation experience. And they didn't show, I don't think they had anything at Tokyo Game Show. Like, Sony doesn't have anything really to show. And a lot of people believe this to lead into the fact that the PS5 is coming pretty soon. Meaning whatever is still left to be released will probably come out next year, and then after that, look for PlayStation 5 in 2020. And this kind of goes on what I was saying in a video or two ago, about Sony is just coasting. Like, people think like this really means anything, when it really just boils down to something as simple as Sony has told you about, and the fact that a lot of the games that Sony has been talking about, especially these last few E3s, have been literally the same games for the most part, minus one or two variations. Like, most people only remember the early PlayStation 4 days because there wasn't a lot there to kind of make it stick out. Like, the one game, the one or two games that stick out are things like Infamous Second Son or Knack. Like, that's early PlayStation 4, and then it feels like you went through this weird gap where there was nothing really major coming out, at least not from Sony. There might have been third-party games for days, but Sony, there wasn't really anything major coming out, and the first game that kind of started getting back on that kickback for Sony was like Horizon, which came out early last year, and has been relatively consistent, give or take, throughout 2017 and 2018. And now I think the only things we got left were like Ghost of Tsushima, Days Gone, Last of Us 2, Sekiro. Like, there isn't a lot left. And I think that's what they're going to use in the momentum they've had this entire generation. And that's going to carry them into PS5. It would be kind of ironic that... Oh yeah, and Uncharted 4. I'm forgetting Uncharted 4 too. And its DLC. Sony's just coasting. It's what I said before. Sony doesn't have to do much. Sony ran away with this generation from jump because it was the only console that came out and didn't fuck anything up. That's literally... That's why I said, like, Sony's accomplishment this gen isn't really an accomplishment because you only really won because you just didn't do anything wrong. But it also means you didn't do anything amazing either, which they didn't. They literally just did what they needed to do, the bare fucking minimum. And Microsoft fucked itself, and Nintendo fucked itself. And even now, with the Switch doing gangbusters and selling well, and getting back up there with its momentum, and getting this momentum, Sony ain't slowed down. If anything, Sony's starting to sell more in certain months than they did the year prior. Sony is chilling, and Sony will continue to chill. Sony has such a gang lead, Sony doesn't have to try hard. So even if they don't show up at E3 next year, it doesn't really mean much. Because Sony, unfortunately, well, I say fortunately for Sony, Sony has this level of, like, mind share that as long as a game comes out on their console, that's all that fucking matters. And considering next year, in January, we start off with Kingdom Hearts 3. a franchise that has been heavily associated with Sony, even though it's going to be on Xbox One, they're already starting off next year with a bang, and they ain't even putting out a game. Because nobody, and that's kind of the weird, like I almost, in some ways I want to make the reference that Sony is essentially Comcast, where Comcast doesn't have to try because they're, in a lot of people's minds, they are the only ones, right? Like to make the correlation, in a lot of areas, Comcast is like the only provider people have. Even though Comcast isn't necessarily the greatest fucking cable company in the world, in a lot of cases people fucking hate them. But they're the best you can possibly get in your situation, and in a lot of people's there is no other choice. So you get them. It's kind of like with Sony. Even though you have Xbox and Nintendo right there, Xbox getting most of the same games except for the Japanese games and the exclusives Sony has. We don't count that. Nintendo already has too many differences with Sony for people to look at that as the same, similar kind of product. So it's like, yeah, Sony is the end-all, be-all. So Sony will win for the fuck of it. Because they've already won this generation. Like, if we're looking at their generation, they didn't do... most people would say they did worse than the PS3. But they still won, so they don't give a fuck. It's like being in a boxing match and being like, damn, this wasn't as hype as last year's. I still won, though. The fuck doesn't matter. I still won. That's literally what it is. And in some cases, that's a good thing. In some cases, that's a bad thing. For the fans, it's going to be bad because that just tells me the only thing... Like, think about it. This E3 was already kind of weird in itself. The fact that, the 4 games you focused on, only one of them was even coming out this year. Because the other 3, which was Ghost of Tsushima, Last of Us 2, and Death Stranding, are all games that hadn't even come out. I still don't even think some of those games have release years, let alone dates. And then but like the month before in May, you showed off a bunch of Days Gone footage. And that game doesn't, I'm not sure if that game has a release date, but I know it's a 2019 game. And I'm like, wouldn't that have made more sense, guys? The only game that they even talked about this year that came out was fucking Spider-Man. And the only game before that was God of War. And I guess Detroit, which, David Cage games are just David Cage games. I don't know how high up on the tier list they'll come. The best thing they usually get is the best performances. And why? Because they're fucking movies. So, I mean, it's good. It's good to know that that's what we're leaning towards. And part of this, I think, is the fact that they've been trying to push the system to its limits every time a new game comes out. That's why these games are looking closer and closer to fucking CGI films. But the trade-off is that you have less releases. Like, think about it. There aren't a lot of high-tier Sony games that came out this generation. Sony exclusives, I should say, specifically. Compared to, like, the PS3 or the PS2. And most people even said the PS3 was a step down from the PS2 in terms of game quantity. Quantity, I don't know about quality, but I know about quantity at least. There wasn't as many. And it's even less than that now. So we're about to jump into supposedly a new generation with a console it's the same thing. It's gonna look better and better, but you're gonna get less and less games. And I don't know. I don't think it's inherently the smartest thing to do. I think it should dial it back, but I think Sony's trapped itself. Sony won't dial it back because it knows it doesn't. In my opinion, I don't think Sony really holds a candle in terms of game design. I think what saves them a lot is because they went into a different direction, which is fine because you want more variety in your games. You want every game to be the same kind. That's people's issues with Nintendo, where for a while they were focusing on platformers and everyone in the back was like, guys, there are other genres you need to fuck with. So it's the same thing. Although I would argue, make the same argument that I think Sony's leaning too much into the fucking movie style game and not really doing gameplay as much. Like the only game I feel like they've released in a while, at least, I'll be fair, 2 games, is probably Spider-Man and fucking Horizon. Although I think Nier is Sony. Well, it's not anymore. But when Nier came out and it was PlayStation exclusive, or PlayStation and PC, that was another game. I think we need more variety out because I think God of War is I don't really view in the same tier. But getting back on topic and then I'll finish this off. Sony, the announcement that Sony isn't going to be at E3 doesn't really mean much because Sony doesn't have to do anything anymore. Xbox has already kind of ruined itself, even while making improvements, they cannot catch them. It's not like the 360 PS3 situation where the 360 was running away with money between Sony and Xbox because because Nintendo was killing it from jump. Microsoft was running away with the money for like the majority of the generation, or at least half of it, and then Sony just kind of crept back on them and killed them by the end. By the end of the generation, where they were tied, or they were either one was slightly above the other one, or they were tied. It was so close, which is insane to think about, considering Microsoft was running away with it. It was running away with that fucking money at least all the way up until about 2009, 2010. And then Sony came out of nowhere and said, "No, bitch. Even if I don't beat you, we damn sure ain't about to. We at least gonna tie." Which is essentially what they did. I think technically the PS3 is sold a little bit more than the 360. But the point is, that's an insane comeback considering how far behind Sony was at the beginning of the generation because they fucked everything up. Microsoft doesn't have that same level of power or competence at this point, is what I'm going to be willing to admit, to achieve that. They can't. That's why they're trying to do a bunch of setup for next gen. But that's not going to help them this gen. This gen, they're just going to do about as best as they can, and that's it. Which is funny because I have an Xbox video that needs to be talked about too. But that's really all I have to say. Like, people want to act like this is a huge blow to Sony, but unfortunately, as much as I would think that, realistically, it's been shown through numbers, Sony didn't have to do much. I mean, for God's sakes, GTA 5 still sells on fucking Sony, and it's not like there aren't any third-party games coming out, or that Sony doesn't have any games coming out next year anyway. It just means we won't get any real fucking surprises until later. So I think their exclusives are like 5 games: the Medieval remake, Sekiro, Ghost of Tsushima, Death Stranding, and Days Gone. I mean, those are the 5 exclusives we know about. They're coming out. And some of those have rumors around going that those will be cross-platform, which things like Death Stranding probably will be. So, I don't know. That's just my thoughts and opinions. But leave yours in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you subscribe. Click the notification bell for more videos. And like I always say, life's a game, play to win. And I will catch you guys later. Peace. Oh, shit, that hurt.